Greg, introduce yourself, please.
I am Senator Greg Razor from Missouri's 7th Senatorial District, which is the heart of Kansas City.
Welcome to TranScript, where we talk about trans issues in education.
I'm your host, Gene Johnson, former superintendent of the Shawnee Mission School District in Kansas.
And I'm Brad Tennant, longtime math teacher in Kansas. And today on TranScript, we'll talk about lawmakers and how what they do filters down into classrooms and parents. Senator, there's a battle going on again in the Kansas legislature over gender-affirming care for minors. You guys already had this fight in Missouri. What can parents and educators expect?
I think parents can expect to hear the worst of stereotypes said about them and their children, the worst of lies said about them and their children. And in Missouri last year, I sat through I don't know how many of these committee hearings, and I think I lost my cool before the parents or the kids did. And I was so proud of all of them. The committee room where these hearings were is right next to my office. And after every one, these families would come into my office and tears were shed and hugs. And I'm grateful that I was there to do that, and I hope I never have to experience it again.
What's the future look like? Are things, what's next?
Well, what's next in Missouri is we were able to, I led a 3-day filibuster, which is something I don't think Kansas really does in their Senate. But I led a 3-day filibuster, and we negotiated several terms, one of which being our law has a 4-year sunset clause. So in 3.5 years, it literally just stops being effective. The other side of the aisle is trying to remove that sunset clause. I've blocked them. We made a deal. I think leadership understands when you shake hands and make a deal in the Senate, you got to live up to your word. But in 3.5 years, that will be a big fight again. My hope and what I think is by that time, the far right will have found a new boogeyman and will have moved on, and there won't be the energy behind this. Plus, our community is going to better educate the public on who trans people are. If you look at history, we always lose these first few battles each time. Whether it's about federal employment, whether it's about HIV/AIDS funding, non-discrimination laws, marriage, the military. We lose, and then over time people understand who we are, and then we win. And we're just biding time right now for people to understand who transgender people are and become comfortable with it. In the meantime, we got to hold this back. The day after we voted on the bill in the Missouri Senate, I'm back at home and I get a phone call. And of course, I'd given about a 10-minute speech before the vote. And it was from a college friend of mine who lives in rural Missouri, and her son at the time was 15. And she calls and says, "Greg, my son and 2 of his buddies come bursting through the door after school today." And he said, Mom, tell him you know Senator Razor. Tell him you know him. And they had been listening in class to my speech live because in this rural Missouri town, they have a transgender classmate. And the whole class was cheering me on. And I told my friend, I said, wait a second. Are you telling me that in rural Missouri, 3 smelly, sweaty 15-year-old boys came bursting into your kitchen supporting their transgender classmate? And she said, Greg, they don't care. It's not an issue. The only people this is an issue with are adults.
Man, that's great to hear. Because I think, I'm in northeast Johnson County, and even though we're in Kansas, I always am concerned that maybe that's just our little oasis.
Sure.
But I certainly see that we're we're seeing a bigger impact in the rural community too.
We are. This is not going to be an issue in 25 years. Now, the fear I have is if we didn't have the sunset clause in Missouri, if we hadn't gotten that in there, how long would it take us to get it out? Society might change within 25 years, but it's going to take another 25 or 50 to get the legislature on board, especially with, look, right now in Missouri, primaries are all that matter. My district was intentionally drawn so that a Republican can't win. They crammed as many Democrats as they could into one district. So a Republican can't beat me. and that's intentional. So the same holds true for Republicans. Now, their base is who comes out in primaries, and it's their base who will be the last, if ever, to embrace transgender people. So they have no incentive to embrace. So they'll be 25, 50 years behind, just like they are on LGBT issues. They still won't pass a non-discrimination clause in Jefferson City. Public schools are under attack for being open places where every child in your community gets to go for free and get a top-notch education. Mm-hmm. That means that you have to accept everybody. And there's a lot of folks that I serve with that aren't happy with that. I don't know if they don't understand people that have a different worldview. They certainly don't understand why everyone doesn't share their religion. These are things that we talk about often in Jefferson City, appallingly so, especially with the separation of church and state. They can't fathom what that means, and it becomes frightening at some point.
Greg, in Missouri, it's not just Republicans in the legislature, but also Attorney General Andrew Bailey, who is going after records from Planned Parenthood. How does that play into all of this issue?
I think it plays into his election for Attorney General, is all that it does. He was appointed to this position by the governor. He has kind of gone rogue, I think. He is trying to out right-wing everyone he can and seems to trip everywhere he turns. Even on this issue, when the General Assembly was focused on preventing kids from having transitional services, he went the next step and said, well, we need to stop adults. And even the far right that I serve with was like, well, that's one step too far for us. Adults can do what they want. And so he seems to always take it one step too far. Mm-hmm. And he wants records from Planned Parenthood. I find it odd that the same people who hate the government and don't want the government to know anything also needs a list of women's menstrual cycles. Okay. Which they literally did a few years ago.
Your colleagues, I'm sure just based on our conversation here, they know how you stand on this, and how do your colleagues in a general way react to your thoughts about this transgender topic?
I would say there's a handful that are true believers and they're polite to me, mm-hmm. and a very small handful. The majority of them, I think, simply they don't understand, and they know they don't understand. I think they have enough respect for me, and they know how sincere I am, that they allowed me to shut the Senate down for 3 days. They allowed me time to negotiate. They knew I was doing what I thought was right. There is a procedure in the Missouri Senate to shut down a filibuster, and I think had I been anybody else, they may have done it after 2 days. Mm-hmm. But they let me go because they understood how deeply I felt about this, and that even if they thought I was wrong, they knew I thought I was helping children. Mm-hmm. And I think they weren't so sure that they were right.
It's too bad we can't get them into a typical classroom. Because I know that I've been teaching for 20 years, and my exposure to transgender students in the classroom certainly has shaped my view, because I see them, they're just normal kids. Mm-hmm. And I imagine you could live your life as a state legislator and not be exposed to transgender people, depending on where you lived. And that's certainly not the case in the classroom.
She has moved away now, but for several years we had transgender woman who was in the Capitol every day, a young African-American woman from rural Missouri. And she worked the halls of the Capitol every single day in the most fun dresses and high heels, and scared the bleep out of most of these legislators. But after a year or two, they start to get to know her. And then another year or two, she's a friend. Yeah. And they were like, she has to be, several said this, she has to be the bravest person that I've ever met. And I reminded one of them that. They asked me on the Senate floor, like, are these really the people you want in our state? I was like, people who will stand up to anyone and say, regardless of what you and society think of me, I'm going to be me, and I'm going to bust through that door. Yes, that's who I want in my state. And I think this is my 8th year in the legislature, and this is the only year so far that at least one Republican hasn't pulled me aside to ask questions about our community as a whole. And all but once, they were rural white men 70 and older.
Right.
I got one of them to stand up on the House floor one day when I was serving in the House. And he said, look, I've been told for 70 years that LGBT people are disgusting and wrong and immoral. We've been taught wrong for 70 years. It's time we change course. It's not too late.
Oh, that's amazing.
These stories happen.
Well, it's quite a burden for you. I mean, to be the spokesmodel.
It's a lot. It's a lot of tear-filled hugs. It's a lot of always having to be prepared. They really want to get rid of the sunset. And so this year, anytime something comes up about children, an amendment could be put on to get rid of the sunset. Healthcare, an amendment could be put on to get rid of the sunset. Anything that fits within the category of whatever bill is up, if they can find a way to weave it in, they will. So I'm always on edge because at any moment my chief of staff could run into the office and say, Senator is offering this amendment. And I have to run out to the Senate floor to call a point of order or to get ready to filibuster. So that puts you on edge, but there is a lot of, I know kids are looking at me. The second half of my speech before the vote last year, I just spoke directly to trans kids in Missouri. I know they're listening. I know their parents are depending on me. I know the advocates in the hallway. I'm the backstop. I'm the last resort in Missouri. When this came up last year, the 10 Democrats in the Senate were now the 10 highest elected people in the state of Missouri within the Democratic Party. And I was leading on this one. So it was up to me to decide, do we keep the filibuster going, or have we gotten enough concessions that we sit? Because if they'd had stopped my filibuster, the worst was going to pass. So I don't want them to pass the worst possible version. I've gotten them to a place. I think this is now when we sit, but some kids are going to get hurt when I sit.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And
I'm still dealing with that.
Now, Greg, we need to wrap up here, but I do have a question I think is real important, and that is, if you weren't there, what would happen?
Somebody else would step up.
You believe that.
Somebody
That's
else
good.
would step up. The 10 of us that are in the Senate, in the Democratic Party, we stick together.
Mm-hmm.
We really do. That's not something you can often say of Democrats.
Yeah.
You know, we kind of go our own way. But we stick together. And with this issue, I think the other 9 took a step back. It was like, we're going to follow Greg's lead.
Okay.
If I wasn't there, one of them would have stood up and said, I'm taking the lead.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to hear you say that. That's great. Greg, thanks for being with us today and joining us on TranScript. And we've covered a lot of ground today. And so Brad and I are going to ponder this for a bit, and we'll be back in a couple of minutes to talk about it.
Great. Thanks again, Senator Greg Razor from Kansas City. Thanks for joining us on TranScript.
Thank you for having me and for what you do.
Brad, what did we learn today?
Well, I think one of the things that really stood out from talking with Greg Razor is that transgender issues are front and center in the Missouri legislature. But at least I think that Greg was very hopeful that things are getting better, and it's some of it is going to be a matter of time, waiting out to get. And he talked about the parallels between other issues they've had. Whether it was gay rights or same-sex marriage, that became easier to accommodate in the legislature over time.
Yeah, I kind of felt when he talked about what's going on with transgenders that he was more hopeful than I think I am on how that's going to transpire and move forward, and like it did with gays and lesbians, and then we had the same-sex marriage, and now we're into this, and it seems like a huge hurdle to get over when you talk about gender-affirming care and legislatures that don't want gender-affirming care. And so I guess I came out of this feeling that, because we only hear, well, I shouldn't say we just only hear, but we always hear the negative side of these issues that are controversial. But then we also hear about, as a good example is, how kids are accepting students,
Right.
transgender kids. And, kind of like at Oak Park High School over in Kansas City, Missouri, they voted a transgender girl as homecoming queen. And they got heat for that, but they did it. And
Right, and as we mentioned, we've talked about this earlier, that we hope that the schools in some ways they're the oasis, and maybe they're the future, or they're at least pointing things in the right direction, and that the rest of society can follow what we're seeing in the schools as far as acceptance and things that maybe in the rest of Kansas and Missouri seem strange have become just mainstream in the schools.
I think that's right. So, but then again, once we get over this hurdle, in the future, there'll be another one.
Right, exactly.
Who knows what it is, but it'll be there.
And that's this episode of TranScript. TranScript is produced by Sam Zeff and is part of the Archiver series of podcasts.
Make sure to subscribe to Archiver wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, I'm Gene Johnson.
And I'm Brad Tennant, and we'll see you on the next TranScript.